JFK assassination. What are we asking? Did Cuba play a role in JFK's assassination? Why do people believe this theory? What does the evidence actually say? And how do biases and Cold War fear shape this belief? How do we prove it wrong? What happened to JFK? On November 22nd, 1963, JFK was shot in Dallas, Texas in a motorcade. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and killed by a nightclub owner, Jack Ruby, on live television. This sparked decades of conspiracy theories. Background: in 1959, Fidel Castro comes into power and becomes Prime Minister of Cuba. This begins land reforms as U.S. property was taken over, causing tension in the U.S. Cuba becomes a communist state and aligns with the Soviet Union. The U.S. now sees Cuba as a threat. In 1961, the U.S. breaks off all ties with Cuba. January 20th, the JFK becomes President of the United States. The Bay of Pigs fails, and Operation Mongoose was put in place. 1962 and 1963 was the Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day standoff which brings the world to the brink of a nuclear war. This ends with a secret deal. As Soviets remove missiles, the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba. In 1963, Oswald visits Cuba and Soviet embassies, pleading for a visa. On November 22nd, JFK was assassinated and Oswald was charged with murder. Why Cuba? Cuba was a Cold War ally of the USSR. Kennedy was pursuing secret talks to ease tensions with Cuba, and Castro believed these were a trap. Castro had a reputation for aggressively protecting Cuba. Weeks before the assassination, Oswald attempted to enter Cuba pleading for a visa. Cuban intelligence had tabs on Oswald, and Operation Mongoose, which was an attempt to get rid of Castro, was put into place as Castro warns leaders they will not be safe if they continue to target Cuba. Oswald's ties to Cuba. Coincidence or connection? Connection. Oswald was a former Marine who defected the Soviet Union. He promoted pro-Castro causes and handed out flyers, leaflets for the fair play for Cuba community, and the public defended Castro. Contacted Cuban officials in Mexico City, as him and both Castro shared an enemy in JFK, as they both had motive. Coincidence: he was denied visa in Cuba as officials saw him as unstable and didn't want him in his country. He acted alone. The Warren Commission found no links between Oswald and Cuban intelligence, and his actions were extremely unpredictable. Cold War context. Cold War tensions. Cuba aligned with the Soviet Union after Castro's revolution became the first communist country in the Western Hemisphere. In the high-tension Cold War era, the idea that Cuba may retaliate by killing the U.S. president makes sense. The Bay of Pigs, the U.S. attempts to overthrow Castro using Cuban exiles, which failed and humiliated both the CIA and Kennedy. Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world came to a nuclear war, as there was an intense standoff with U.S. and the USSR with Cuba at the center. The U.S. viewed Castro as a serious threat to democracy because Cuba believed the U.S. was trying to destroy its government. Psychological. Why people cling to the Cuba theory. Confirmation bias. People try to find information that supports their existing beliefs and ignore opposing evidence. Once someone believes that the official story is false, they are more likely to only notice evidence that supports a conspiracy like Oswald's ties. Proportionality bias. People assume the big world changing events have powerful causes. The idea that a lone gunman killed a U.S. president feels too small and random. Cognitive dissonance. Believing the U.S. government could fail to prevent JFK's death creates more of emotional discomfort. Cold War tensions created ground for suspicion, as Castro had motive and Oswald has ties. Theories offer emotional closure and identity, and the ideas reinforce a belief, like a cult. From theory to cult. Conspiracy theories give identity to the people and also emotional support to people who feel lost. Truth seekers feel morally driven. Group behavior reinforces beliefs over time. Online community amplifies conspiracy theories. Evidence against this. Eyewitnesses saw a rifle in the Texas school book depository. Rifle and bullets matched Oswald's gun, and the Warren Commission didn't find ties between Oswald and the Cuban government. What is unknown or even unknowable is whether Oswald had deeper connections or intentions that were never uncovered or indirect influences that left no evidence.